Chronicles of Christ, the Crucifixion. You have heard probably every Good Friday of your life about the 7 last words of Christ, the 7 sayings from the cross preached in 7 meditations set to music by everyone from Haydn to your church choir. So let me open with a fact that reorders the whole scene. Those 7 sayings do not exist in any single gospel. Not one of the 4 contains all 7. The famous 7 last words is a stitching together, a harmony assembled centuries later by laying all 4 accounts end to end, and once you see the seams, they tell you something the smooth version works hard to hide. Because here is the strange, holy tension at the center of this chronicle, the surest event in the whole life of Jesus, told in the least harmonious way. That he was crucified under Rome is, along with his baptism, one of exactly 2 facts virtually every historian on earth accepts as flatly certain. And yet the 4 witnesses who agree completely that he died cannot agree on what he said as he died. Read them separately, as we always do here, and you don't find one dying Christ. You find 3, one who dies screaming a question into the dark, one who dies forgiving everyone in sight, and one who dies like a workman setting down a finished tool. The tradition, unable to bear choosing between them, did the thing this house is forever catching. It blended them. And blending them is precisely how the truth gets lost. So here's the plan. We'll listen to the 3 different deaths honestly, one at a time. We'll find out what the dying man was actually saying when he cried out, because he was quoting, and the thing he quoted is deeper than despair. We'll stand on the hard historical ground beneath it, the darkness, the burial, the nails, and refuse both the skeptic's easy sneer and the believer's easy fudge, because a death this serious deserves better than either. And we'll end where the church itself took centuries to arrive, able at last to look straight at it, come to the foot of it carefully. This is the one the whole story has been walking toward. 3 deaths. Let me show you the 3 deaths, and I'll ask you to feel how different they are, because the difference is the evidence. Open Mark, the earliest gospel, and watch Jesus die. He hangs for hours, darkness covers the land, and at the 9th hour he cries out in Aramaic the only words Mark gives him from the cross, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? And then this is the detail people skate past. He gives a second loud cry, wordless, and dies. That's it. In Mark and in Matthew, who follows him, Jesus dies with a question on his lips and no answer to it, abandoned, roaring into a dark sky. There is no serenity here. There is no, it is finished. There is a man crying out that God has left him, then a scream, then silence. It is the bleakest deathbed in all of Scripture, and the oldest gospel hands it to us with no comfort attached. Now open Luke, and it's as if you've walked into a different room. Luke has none of that anguished cry, none of it. He appears to have set it deliberately aside. Instead, Luke's Jesus dies in total command of himself, and he speaks 3 times, and every word flows outward as grace. To the soldiers driving the nails, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. To the criminal dying beside him who asks to be remembered, truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. The very end, not a question but a trusting surrender. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Luke's Christ does not die forsaken. He dies forgiving, welcoming, and trusting a shepherd to the last. And I'll show you my hand honestly. That first saying, Father, forgive them, is missing from some of our oldest and best manuscripts of Luke. A genuine question mark hangs over whether Luke wrote it or a later scribe added it. It is so beautiful we ache for it to be original. Honesty requires me to tell you we aren't sure. Test everything, even the lines you love most. Now open John, and it's different again, not anguish, not quite the same grace, but completion. John's Jesus is sovereign on the cross, arranging his affairs. He sees his mother and the disciple he loved standing below and gives them to each other. Woman, behold your son, behold your mother. He says, I thirst, and John tells us even this fulfills a scripture. And then at the very end, a single Greek word that in John is the whole gospel, tetelestai. It is finished. Not I am finished, it is, the work is done, the thing accomplished. It's the word a merchant wrote across a settled bill, paid in full. John's Jesus does not lose a struggle. He finishes a work, and then John says he hands over his spirit, a deliberate giving, not a losing. So there they are, and I won't blend them for you, because blending them is exactly how the truth escapes. 3 deaths, forsaken, forgiving, finished. And the tradition, unable to bear the choice, harmonized, gathered all the sayings from all 4 gospels, lined them into sequence no gospel contains, and called them the 7 last words. And here's the tell that gives the whole game away. Remember that Mark and Matthew end on a wordless cry, a scream with no content. What did the harmonizers do with that silence? They filled it, plugged in Luke's into your hands or John's it is finished, so the scream would have words. But no gospel says that. The wordless cry is meant to stay wordless. Someone found the silence unbearable and spoke into it. I understand the impulse completely. But if you want the real Christ of the real gospels, you have to let each of them die his own death, and you have to let Mark's Jesus scream and not answer him. What the dying man was saying. Let's go back to Mark's terrible cry, because there's more inside it than despair, and to hear it you have to know what Jesus was doing when he said it. He wasn't only crying out, he was quoting, my God, why have you forsaken me? is the first line of Psalm 22, and any Jew standing at the foot of that cross would have known it the way you know the first line of a song and would have heard underneath the scream the whole rest of it coming. And the whole rest of it is uncanny. Read Psalm 22, written centuries before any Roman ever built a cross, and it reads like an eyewitness report of a crucifixion. All who see me mock me, they wag their heads, the passers-by did exactly that. He trusts in the Lord, let the Lord deliver him. The chief priests jeered almost those very words. They divide my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing. The soldiers did precisely that beneath him, and John points straight at the verse. Christians have always found this astonishing, and understandably so. And the psalm contains the single most argued line in the whole Old Testament, so let me hand it to you honestly, because this is exactly the kind of textual work this house exists to do. Psalm 22 has a verse that Christian Bibles render, "They have pierced my hands and my feet," and you can see why that would stop a Christian's breath at the foot of the cross. But here's the honest complication. The standard Hebrew text, the one the synagogue has preserved, does not say pierced. It says a word ka'ari that means like a lion, my hands and my feet, a phrase so grammatically incomplete that translators have to guess at the missing verb. Where does pierced come from then? From the ancient Greek translation made by Jews before Christ, which read a nearly identical Hebrew word as a verb. They dug, they pierced, one letter's difference. And here's the genuinely interesting part, the part the skeptics don't like and the apologists overstate. Our oldest copy of this verse, from a Dead Sea Scroll older than Christianity, sides with pierced, not lion. So the piercing reading is not a Christian invention, it's ancient and may well be original. But keeping faith with you, that same Dead Sea scribe misspelled a great many other words, so we can't lean our whole weight on him. The honest verdict, "Pierced my hands and feet," is a genuinely ancient reading, quite possibly right, resting on evidence that is strong but not airtight, not a fraud, not a proof, a real, live, unresolved textual question, and a haunting one. But here's the thing I most want you to carry out, because it turns Mark's bleak cry inside out. Psalm 22 does not stay in the dark. Read to its end and it turns from "Why have you forsaken me?" It climbs verse by verse to "I will tell of your name to my brothers, to all the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord," to a shout of worldwide praise. It begins in a pit and ends in a coronation. And there was a known Jewish practice of naming an entire psalm by quoting its first line, the way you'd say, "Let's sing Amazing Grace," and mean the whole hymn, not just 3 words. So it's entirely possible, and many careful readers hold it, that when Jesus cried the opening line of Psalm 22, he wasn't surrendering to despair but reaching for the whole psalm, the one that starts in abandonment and ends in the vindication of God before all the nations. I won't force that on you. Mark, for his part, lets the scream stand raw and unexplained, and that rawness is its own kind of truth. But before you decide the dying Christ of Mark had lost all hope, remember which song he chose. A man reaching for Psalm 22 with his last breath may be doing the bravest thing in the whole story. Naming his forsakenness in the exact words of a poem that he knew, that he had to have known, does not end there. One last honest note, because we owe it to our neighbors. Psalm 22 is a Jewish psalm, and the Jewish tradition reads it as it stands, the lament of a righteous sufferer, David, or the people of Israel in their long affliction, crying out and then being delivered. That reading is ancient, coherent, and belongs to the people who wrote it. Christians hear Jesus in it, Jews hear David or themselves. Both are hearing something true in a psalm large enough to hold a great deal of human anguish. We can say what we hear without unsaying what they hear, a lesson this house learned the hard way, in the volume just before this one. The hard ground. Now let's stand on the historical ground beneath the cross, because there are 3 places where honest testing matters and where both the sneer and the fudge fail. First, the darkness. All 3 of the earlier Gospels report that from noon to 3 darkness covered the land. You will sometimes hear this explained as a solar eclipse, and you must not let anyone tell you that on either side, because it is simply astronomically impossible. Passover falls at the full moon. A solar eclipse can only happen at the new moon, when the moon slides between Earth and Sun, the exact opposite phase. It cannot happen at Passover, full stop. And even if it could, the longest a total eclipse can last is about 7.5 minutes, not 3 hours. So whatever the darkness was, it was not an eclipse, and the gospel writers, who knew perfectly well the moon was full that night, weren't claiming it was one. That leaves honest options. That it was a sign the prophet Amos had written centuries before, "I will make the sun go down at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight," the language of divine judgment the gospel writers surely had in mind. Or a natural darkness of another kind, a heavy dust storm of the sort that can blot the sun for hours in that season, or a theological image painting the death in the colors of the day of the Lord. I can't tell you which. I can tell you it wasn't an eclipse, and that anyone who says it was, to prove the Bible or to mock it, is describing a sky that cannot exist. Second, the burial, a real historical puzzle and not a simple one. We meet a man named Joseph of Arimathea, who asks Pilate for the body and lays Jesus in a rock-cut tomb, an honorable burial. And here honesty cuts against comfort. Honorable burial was not what crucifixion victims normally got. The whole point of a Roman crucifixion was humiliation without end. The bodies were usually left on the crosses to rot and be taken by scavengers, or thrown into a common grave. So a rich man's tomb is unexpected, and some serious scholars, Crossan most famously, argue that Joseph of Arimathea is a later invention, and that Jesus's body most likely met the ordinary grim Roman fate. That's the hard case, and I won't hide it. But it isn't the whole case. Jewish law was emphatic that a body must not hang overnight. His body shall not remain on the tree. And the historian Josephus confirms that Jews took this so seriously they buried even the crucified before sunset. And there's a piece of physical evidence that lands squarely on the gospel's side. Yehohanan, the one crucified man whose skeleton archaeologists have ever found, the heel bone with the nail still through it, dug up outside Jerusalem in 1968. That man was crucified by Rome and then given a proper Jewish burial, his bones laid in a stone box by his family, which is the only reason we have him at all. So we know from the ground itself that at least one crucifixion victim in Roman Judea was buried honorably by his own people. That doesn't prove Joseph of Arimathea was real, but it proves that what the Gospels describe was possible, even customary, in exactly that time and place. The honest verdict genuinely debated, with real evidence on the burial side. Third, the nails in the body, where I have to correct a confident claim you've almost certainly heard. Preachers love to say the nails went through the wrists, not the palms, because the palms can't bear the body's weight, and they say it is settled fact. It isn't. That same Yehohanan skeleton, our one piece of hard evidence, was first read as having nailed forearms and later reread by other scientists as having tied arms and only the heels nailed. The wrist theory is a reasonable guess from anatomy. It is not a proven fact, and the one body we actually have muddies it rather than settling it. And the deeper truth is that every detailed reconstruction of exactly how Jesus died physically, the medical cause, asphyxiation or shock or heart failure, is educated guesswork built from one skeleton and some Roman descriptions. The Gospels themselves are strikingly unmedical. They do not linger on the gore. What they insist on is not the mechanism, but the fact that he really bodily died, which the historian's favorite criterion confirms, because a crucified Messiah was the single most embarrassing thing anyone could possibly preach. Paul admitted it flatly. A crucified Christ was a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles. Nobody invents a savior who dies the death Rome reserved for slaves and rebels, a death the Jewish scriptures themselves called cursed. Cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree. That curse is exactly why the crucifixion is certain. You do not make up your Lord's deepest scandal. You confess it because it happened. The slowest symbol. Here's a fact that surprises almost everyone, and it tells you something profound about how hard this event was even for the people who loved him. For the first few centuries, Christians almost never depicted the crucifixion at all. The cross that now tops every steeple and hangs at every throat was, for generations, an image the church could barely bring itself to make. It was too raw, too shameful, a death so degrading that to draw your God dying that way was to invite exactly the mockery it drew. And I can prove the mockery to you because, and this is one of the strangest facts in all of Christian history, the earliest surviving picture of Jesus on the cross was drawn by someone making fun of him. Scratched on a wall in Rome around the year 200, there's a crude graffito, a man raising his hand in worship toward a figure on a cross, a figure with the head of a donkey. Beneath it, in clumsy Greek, the caption, Alexamenos worships his God. It's a bully's cartoon, a Roman jeering at some Christian classmate for adoring a crucified nobody. And it is, so far as we know, the first image of the crucifixion anyone ever made. The cross entered art as a punchline before it ever entered as an altar. When Christians finally did begin to depict it, centuries later, notice how. The earliest crucifixes show Christ robed, crowned, eyes open, alive, reigning from the cross, not suffering on it. The bleeding, sagging, agonized Christ we think of as the definitive crucifix, the one in Grunwald's terrible altarpiece, painted for a plague hospital so the dying could see their own sores mirrored in his, that image is medieval, more than 1,000 years after the fact. The church took a very long time to be able to look directly at what it confessed. It moved from a mocking donkey to a robed king to at last a suffering man, and only when it had learned slowly that the suffering was the point. And here's the fact I find most quietly astonishing of all, and I'll set it down plainly. The church has never officially decided how the cross saves. Think about that. This is the center of the faith, the thing every Christian says Jesus' death accomplished, and there is no single, binding, agreed doctrine of the mechanism. Some have taught the cross as a battlefield victory, Christ defeating death and the devil to set the prisoners free. Some, following Anselm, as a payment, the infinite debt of human sin settled by an infinite life. Some in the Reformation as a substitution, Christ bearing the punishment we had earned. Some following Abelard as the supreme demonstration of love, a fire lit to thaw cold hearts. These aren't minor variations, they're genuinely different pictures of what happened on that hill. And the church, in its wisdom or its humility, has never made one of them the law. It has held the fact he died for us as bedrock and left the how as something too large for any single theory to close its hand around, which may be the most honest thing the Church ever did with this event. The cross is surer than any explanation of it. We are far more certain that it saves than we have ever been about how, and the Church, remarkably, has let that uncertainty stand right at its own heart. He stayed. Gather it up, then, at the foot of the surest and strangest thing in the whole story. What stands as bedrock unshakable is this: he was crucified, under pilate outside a city wall on a Roman cross, really and bodily dead. Of everything we've tested in this series, this is the firmest, attested by all four Gospels, by a hostile Roman pen, and by the iron logic that no one would ever invent so shameful a death for the one they called Lord. If you build your faith on a single historical fact, build it here. This ground holds. What is genuinely, honestly varied and unresolved, and I've laid every piece of it in the open, is nearly everything around that fact. The words he died with, which come to us three different ways, forsaken and forgiving and finished, harmonized only by a later hand that couldn't bear to choose. The darkness, which was no eclipse and may have been sign or storm or symbol. The burial, honestly debated though the ground itself tilts toward the Gospels. The nails and the medical particulars, which one skeleton muddies more than it settles, even the ancient reading of the psalm he quoted. And the deepest open question of all, how this death saves, the Church itself has never closed and has been wise not to. And what we hold fast through every one of those uncertainties is the thing the whole event was for, the thing that survives all the testing intact. That on that cross, however we parse his last words, whatever the sky was doing, whoever buried him, by whatever mechanism it works, he was there for us and he did not come down. He could have screamed his forsakenness and been only a broken man. He could have finished his work and been only a stoic. Instead, the four Gospels together give us a Christ who did all of it, forgave from the nails, welcomed a thief, thirsted, finished the work, and cried out into a silence God did not in that hour answer and stayed. The one thing all four witnesses agree on under every difference is that he stayed on it until it killed him. That's the gospel, not a tidy death, a faithful one. So test everything, the words, the sky, the tomb, the nails, the reading, the theories, all of it, all the way down as we have. And hold fast what is good, which here at the very bottom of the story, at the place the whole faith is named for, is a man on a cross who would not come down, a question flung into the dark by someone who knew the whole psalm, and a single word that means paid in full. He stayed, hold fast to that, everything else we can keep testing.